And he is the reason, Maria is dead. He is the reason that she had to give up all of her children for adoption. And he asks her for forgiveness. And she says, if Maria forgives you and God forgives you, how can I not also forgive you? Hey y'all, I'm Heather from Buffering Saint. Welcome to my channel. I like to talk about all things Catholicism, and I'm currently in a summer book club with a bunch of other Catholic moms, so if any of that interests you, subscribe to my channel below. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about a saint who I recently discovered. Her name is Saint Maria Goretti. She is the youngest saint ever to be canonized. She is the patron saint of chastity, rape victims, girls, youth, teenage girls, poverty, purity, and forgiveness. So for a little parental advisory, just in case you have any little kids who might be nearby, some of this story does get a little PG-13, so you may want to listen to this later when you don't have kids around. So the first time I saw Saint Maria Goretti's name was last week when someone in a Facebook group was asking about who a good patron saint for purity would be, and I kept seeing her name pop up in all these comments. So I really didn't think about much of it. I just remember seeing her name, and then the next day I think I got an email from Praying More Novenas. If you haven't heard of that, that's pretty awesome, so you should go look it up. And they said that their next novena, which was going to start the next day, was to Saint Maria Goretti. So I was like, wow, like what a coincidence that I see this saint's name twice in a row, and I had never seen it before. I mean, maybe that's not that uncommon since I'm a convert, but I had never heard of her before. So I went to look her up, and I read her story, and I was blown away. It's amazing. I cried when I read it. I cried when I told my husband about it, and that made him cry. Hopefully I can get through this video without crying, so I'm going to do my best. But Okay, so today, July 6th, is Saint Maria Goretti's feast day. She was born October 16th in 1890 in Italy. When she was 6 years old, her family moved from Ancona to Nettuno in hopes of a better life. Unfortunately, 3 years after they moved, Maria's dad died of malaria. And so at this time, Maria is the oldest of 5 siblings. So with their father dead, their mom had to go work in the fields to provide, and Maria stayed home and took care of all the kids. They also shared a home with another family. So the Gorettis lived, another father and son, the Serenellis. In addition to Maria taking care of the house for her siblings, she also cooked and cleaned for the Serenellis as well. So Maria was a huge help to her mother. She was always assuring her mother that it was okay, that Jesus would provide for them and everything would be fine. Unfortunately, because of their life circumstances, Maria was never able to learn how to read or write, but her parents loved God and they catechized her as best as they could, and she received her first Holy Communion in 1901, and Maria would walk to Mass every day, 2 hours. So 2 hours to Mass and then back. And she would go to confession all the time. She's only 11 or 12 at this time. So she's young. And she just had this huge love for God at such a young age. So the son to Mr. Serenelli, his name is Alessandro. And he had a rough childhood as well. As his mother died in a psychiatric hospital when he was a baby, and his father was an alcoholic. And Alessandro himself was known to drink and known for his anger. So during this time, Alessandro is about 20 years old, and Maria is only 11 or 12. Alessandro began to lust after Maria, and he would approach her and say inappropriate things and make crude advances, and she would tell him, no, that's a sin. God does not want that. We would go to hell. And this continued for several months, and she tried her best to avoid him, and she never said anything to her mom because they had nowhere else to live. And Alessandro would often help her mom out with a lot of the difficult farming tasks. And so I guess she felt like she just didn't want to cause any more difficulties for her mom. So she just gave herself to Jesus and trusted in him. So on July 5th, Maria was taking care of the house, taking care of her younger siblings while the adults were working in the field. And knowing that there were no adults in the home, Alessandro came back to the house with a file, which is a sharpening tool for farming tools. And he approached Maria and demanded that she have sex with him. Like I said, she's only like 11 at this time. She stood her ground. She said, no, God does not want this. This is a sin. So Alessandro tried to overtake her anyway. She tried to fight him off. And then Alessandro was so mad, I guess at that point, that he stabbed her 9 times with this file. At this point, she lost consciousness. Alessandro went back to his room thinking that he killed her, and he shut the door. However, she was still alive at this point, so she crawled to the door. She opened the latch to try to get to the door so she could call for help. Alessandro heard this from his room and came back out and stabbed her 5 more times. So all in all, he stabbed her 14 times. Giovanni, who is Alessandro's father, found her on the floor, and she was still alive at this point and conscious. So when Maria's mother got there, she asked her, who did this to you? And she told them Alessandro did this. And they took her to the hospital, and Alessandro was arrested. At the hospital, the doctors worked to save Maria's life. Due to the amount of blood she had lost, she was severely dehydrated, so she was begging for water. However, because of her wounds and how she was stabbed in the intestines, all of the contents of her intestines were leaking out into her body, so it was like sepsis, and it was toxic, so they couldn't give her any water because they would have made it worse and she would have died faster. Amazingly, at this point, she's still alive. A priest is called to give Maria her last rites before surgery because they're going to attempt surgery to try to fix her wounds. And the priest reminds Maria of Jesus' thirst when he was dying on the cross. And the priest asked Maria if he would offer up her suffering and her thirst for the salvation of sinners. And Maria said yes, and then she didn't ask for water anymore after that. So shortly after that, Maria's surgery began to fix her 14 wounds, and her situation was so precarious. So just remember that the medicine is not that advanced at this point. So they couldn't use anesthesia on her during the surgery at all. So they're widening her wounds and cutting into her, and she has no anesthesia. So she's fully conscious the whole time, and she did not cry out in pain once. Of course, the doctors did the best they could. Unfortunately, Maria died like the next day after her surgery, and the priest was with her in her last moments and asked Maria if she would be able to forgive her attacker. And she says, I forgive Alessandro Serenelli. I want him with me in heaven forever. So on her deathbed, she forgives the person who tried to rape her and killed her. But that's not the end. After Maria died, Assunta, who is Maria's mother, had to give up the rest of her children for adoption because she had no way of taking care of them at this point because the father is dead. Maria, who was the person who was able to stay home while she went to go work, is dead. So she had to give them all up for adoption. Alessandro pleaded innocent at his trial and went so far as to claim that Maria actually attacked him and that he was using self-defense when he killed her or when he was fighting her. However, the judge knew he was lying. Since he was only a minor, he couldn't sentence him to life, so he sentenced him to 30 years in prison. While he was in jail, he continued his aggressiveness and continued getting in fights all the time. He was put into solitary confinement, and he remained unrepentant for killing Maria. His heart was hardened, and he was not interested in seeking forgiveness. Things continued like this for a while for Alessandro. However, 6 years into his prison sentence, he had a dream in which Maria appeared to him, and she handed him 14 white lilies. White lilies are the sign for purity. So 1 lily for each time that he had stabbed her. Alessandro knew at that point that that was Maria forgiving him, or that Maria had forgiven him, and that she was in heaven with God. And so because of this dream, he experienced a conversion. He experienced a conversion and confessed his sins to the bishop and completely turned it around while he was in jail and got out 3 years early on good behavior. And during this time, he had taken Maria as his patron and his intercessor. So because of Maria's forgiveness and mercy, he had a miraculous conversion. When Alessandro was released from prison, he immediately went to go see Assunta, and this is Christmas Eve. So he went to go see Assunta, who was Maria's mother, if you remember, and he went to go see her, and he is the reason, Maria is dead. He is the reason that she had to give up all of her children for adoption. And he asked her for forgiveness. And she says, if Maria forgives you and God forgives you, how can I not also forgive you? And then they went to midnight mass and took communion together. And then Alessandro confessed his sins publicly to the parish and asked their forgiveness as well. And Assunta kind of took him in as her own son. After all of that, she took him as her own son. In 1935, Maria's canonization was opened, and Alessandro testified to her heavenly intercession for his conversion. And Maria was beatified in 1947. And another miracle that is attributed to Saint Maria was for a construction worker whose foot had been crushed by stone, and they had been passing out holy cards with with Saint Maria on them, and he was scheduled to have his foot amputated. Well, his wife came in and wrapped one of Maria's holy cards into his bandages, and the next day when the doctors were coming to amputate his foot was restored completely, and they didn't have to amputate it, and he was able to go to work the same day. So she interceded for that man's on their behalf. And so I think that's an amazing story as well. Maria was canonized in 1950 by Pope Pius XII, and Alessandro was there and Assunta was there. And so this is the first time in history that a mother was able to witness the canonization of her own child. And there were also 500,000 people who attended, which was the most people in attendance for someone's canonization up until that point. And it was the first canonization to be held in St. Peter's Square, because since the basilica was too small for all of those people. Alessandro continued his devotion to Maria and lived out the rest of his life in a Franciscan monastery as a lay brother, doing on jobs around there to help. And he lived a peaceful life until his death in 1970. And many people believe that he will be a saint someday too, and that he is in heaven, which was Maria's wish when she was dying, was that Alessandro be in heaven with her forever. Since then, Saint Maria has interceded for numerous people. She is now known as the Little Saint of Great Mercy. And I was just floored when I read this story. Like, I was amazed. Like, she provides such a good example for purity and love and forgiveness. And when this video is uploaded, it'll be July 6th, which is her feast day, and I will have just finished her novena. And I'm kind of going to take her as patron saint for my kids because she's amazing. And yeah. So I love reading about new saints or new to me saints. It's one of my favorite things about being Catholic. So if you like this video and would like to learn about more saints with me, let me know, because I love to learn about saints. Subscribe down below, thumbs up, hit the bell, and have a blessed day. Bye.